So this video is focusing on making through wedge tenons. Um, so right now what I'm doing, I already have my tenons all cut. On each tenon I've made a little mark. These were each 3/16 of an inch from the edge of the tenon. And that mark is made at the base of the tenon as well. So what I'm going to do is drill a small hole all the way through. The purpose for this hole is as the wedges are driven through, you don't want to run the risk of cracking the wood and that crack continuing on down through whatever that workpiece was or that component. So if you have these holes, it gives a little bit more flexibility to the wood because there's less material there. So instead of just cracking, it's going to have some pliability where it can just splay open instead. Once the holes are drilled, you're then going to go over to the bandsaw and you're going to cut the two slots on each tenon for the wedges to go into. For this, I've just set the fence to be, I forget what the actual distance was, but you want it to be equidistant on both sides so you can just flip it and run. That blade should go into that circle that you drilled out on each side. Because my aprons or stretchers, they're all the same size, it's very easy to cut these because I only have to set the fence once and then I can just keep running them. And once you have all of them, that's pretty much, you're done with the bandsaw. Then you're going to need to start cutting the wedges out. The wedges. So for these, for the mahogany plant stands, I'm using soft maple wedges just to get some bright contrast into that dark wood. I'm using a handsaw and I'm not really measuring these out. I'm just kind of eyeballing it and then making as straight of a cut as I can. But while being straight, it's also angled down so that way it tapers towards the end. So it actually makes a wedge shape. The important thing is you want them longer than the actual tenons. That way you actually have something to get a good little hit on with the mallet when you're driving them in. And you want to make sure that the angle's not so steep that as you drive them in, it's just like an all of a sudden splaying everything out. You want it to be a gradual angle. That way it can work its way in without cracking anything. So for this one, I'm doing 2 wedges on each of the tenons. So for each plant stand, that means there's going to be 8 wedges. So I've got a bunch of these to cut. So I'm going to fast forward through all of this and I will be back to talk about assembly next. For this glue up, again, I'm using epoxy. This time it's mainly because teak is a very oily wood, so wood glue doesn't really form a strong bond with it. So I needed to use the epoxy. Since I had to mix them up, I used it for the mahogany as well. The next time the video slows down, you'll see me using a tri-square. The reason for doing that is I'm checking to make sure as I'm putting pressure on each of these pieces, since there's only that one point in the middle, if you put too much pressure on either side, it's going to make the legs go at an angle. So I have to make sure they're going in at a 90-degree angle and that everything is nice and square before I decide that this clamp is good to push to the side. So the tri-square is very important. Make sure the last thing you want to do is clamp everything up, the glue dries, and then all of a sudden now your legs are all crooked. So when you're assembling, make sure you're checking all of your corners, all your edges. If it's supposed to be square, make sure it's square. One thing I hadn't considered while I was doing this was the temperature of the room. It was pretty hot that day. The epoxy only lasted about 15 minutes before solidifying. Once it solidified, it was basically smoking. So that's something to keep an eye out on. After you place the wedges inside the little slots, then all you have to do is really tap them in with a mallet. Again, I'm using a rubber mallet, not a claw hammer. I don't want to smash everything to pieces. I just want to use enough force where you're just gently tapping everything in. What that does is as the wedges get driven in, it's going to open up the tenon. So it's no longer going straight in. The ends that are closest to where the wedges are going in are going to be wider than when they go in at the base. What this does is add a mechanical strength where it locks it into that mortise. These were traditionally used really before wood glues were really that great. Wood glue would dry up pretty quickly even once it was in a joint. So people had to come up with ways to add mechanical strength. That way, once the glue fails, the joint just doesn't fall apart. So here you see my friend hopped in because, like I said, after 15 minutes, the glue was rock solid. So there was no way I was doing this by myself. So we set up a little assembly line and cranked through everything. So this is the basic assembly for wedged through tenons. There'll be another video where I'll show you after these are done drying. I'm going to have to go back and cut all the wedges off and actually make them look appropriate. Right now they're just tacked in there, don't look so great. So I'll be working on that next video tomorrow and we'll go from there.